Hello again, 121. In this video, I'm going to go over Chapter 13, the Byzantine Empire and the Crisis and Recovery in the West. And this is going to turn into one of the longest lasting empires in world history, the Byzantines. And it began with the restoration of the Eastern Roman Empire under the reign of Justinian. His general Belisarius was successful in defeating the Vandals in North Africa and the Ostrogoths in Italy. And this didn't last much beyond his lifetime, but historians today give him credit for restoring this because there are some significant ideas that come out of the Byzantine Empire. The codification of Roman law, which is the main contribution to Western civilization, occurred during this time. Ideas of civil law, or in the writings of Roman jurists. They wrote a textbook on law, and there were edicts that were actually issued during the reign of Justinian. And this empire lasts until 1453, when the Ottomans defeated them under Mahmud II. Since it was written in Latin, it's eventually used in the West because that is the language of the Catholic Church. Monks, the clergy, were very well versed in these languages, and it's going to become the basis of legal systems in Europe. The Empress Theodora was Justinian's wife. She was an actress and a prostitute at one time, and because her father changed a law, she eventually married this guy, and they will be very influential in the affairs of church and state. She helped give him backbone during the Nika revolts, which were rival fans of different chariot race operators, and the city of Constantinople was pretty much destroyed in those riots. Justinian was reluctant to get into it at first, but his wife convinced him to take a stand and uphold his rule. One of the wonders of the world was built during this time, the Hagia Sophia. It's still there today. Today it is a mosque. In those days it was Eastern Orthodox Christianity church. And the Hippodrome were also another famous building in Constantinople. This is a long, ancient city with a huge history to it. The Hippodrome is where they went for chariot racing. And emperors had to be aware of their demands. They were passionate fans. Sometimes losses resulted in riots, and it threatened the power of the emperor, as we just mentioned, during that Nika uprising. This empire expanded too far, just as the Romans did before them. Their treasury was broke after all of the fighting. There was a plague that threatened the health of the residents, and there are continuous threats on the frontier. That's pretty much the legacy of the Eastern Roman Empire after Justinian is gone. There are attacks from the Persians in the east and the Slavs in the north in the 600s, but the most serious threat comes from the rise of Islam. And the Arabs attempted to besiege Constantinople as early as the 7th century, but they failed because of Greek fire, which was a petroleum-based compound containing quicklime and sulfur. And they used that to repel the Islamic forces. In the Balkans, the Bulgars defeated the Eastern Roman forces, and they established a kingdom in 679. In the 700s, Greek becomes the common language and the official language, and charges of idolatry began to be heard, despite arguments that images helped illiterate people understand Christianity. And the iconoclasts were the opponents of idolatry. They feared people worshiping the pictures or icons. And iconoclasm is important in Islam as well, and in later 1500s Europe. An iconoclast is a destroyer of accepted wisdom today. Leo outlawed the use of icons, and this led to the separation officially of the Roman and Eastern Orthodox churches in 1054. The Roman popes were opposed to the iconoclastic edicts. Although some emperors later reversed the stand on the use of images, the damage to the Catholic Church had been done. It split. In the Eastern Roman Empire, there is a permanent war economy. The state regulated economic affairs. They controlled commerce. And the Byzantine emperor comes to consider himself chosen by God, crowned in an elaborate ceremony, and subjects will prostrate themselves in his presence. With so many foreign enemies, the emperor spent a considerable amount of time on war and preparation, and they created manuals on war fighting. The armies had the latest weapons, but they would try to engage in diplomacy. And the word in the West today, Byzantine, means something extremely complicated or carried on by underhanded methods, or stems from complex or crafty instructions that diplomats received from their emperors. Procopius wrote the history of Belisarius's wars and Justinian's wars in the Mediterranean. His secret history is a scandalous gossip about Theodora and Justinian. Trade was very important in Constantinople. It was an entrepot, and that's why it was such a prosperous and successful city. And then you have some other examples of famous entrepot cities in world history. They are mainly exchanges places for the goods of the East and the West. And we've talked about these different items that travel back and forth between the different regions of the world. Those are the years of the zenith of the Byzantine civilization. Under Michael, it's revived again. There's still problems with the church. The Eastern bishops excommunicated the Pope. And this is another wedge between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. There's the Macedonian dynasty during those years. And he eventually murdered Michael, his patron. They saw themselves as a continuation of the Christian Roman Empire. They helped to strengthen the position of farmers. They expanded trade with Western Europe. And because of this, Eastern Orthodox Christianity in these years in the 9th century makes its way to Europe at this time. The Prince of Kiev was converted to Christianity in those years. And this became the model for Russian religious life. Under the Macedonians, they had a strong civil service, talented emperors, and military advances. Again, we saw that map earlier. And here are some of the other outstanding rulers. And by 1025, the empire is the largest it had been since Justinian's time. The decline, another schism. They excommunicated each other, so there's no unity in this church to this day. The Seljuk Turks were some of the first Islamic empires that attempted to conquer this part of the world. The Fatimids attempted to unify the Islamic world under a Shiite dynasty, and they became the rivals of the Abbasids, or the Sunnis, in Baghdad. The Fatimids became the dynamic center of Islam. The Seljuk Turks would be their warriors, their mercenaries. They hired them. But as what happens, as we saw with Kublai Khan, those mercenaries ended up threatening and taking over their bosses. And they captured Baghdad in 1055, and they moved into Asia Minor, which is Turkey today. And the Emperor Romanus IV will lead an army from Constantinople against the Seljuks, but he was defeated. And this defeat during the Battle of Manzikert, please be familiar with this, in 1071, gave them control of Asia Minor, also called Anatolia. Today it's known as Turkey. Alexis Comnenus breathed new life into the empire. And the Crusades kick in again. We talked about the Crusades in the last chapter. Here's some more information on that. Originally, Alexis appealed to Pope Urban II for assistance against the Turks. And because they're going to have to travel through Palestine they're going to have to travel through Constantinople to get to the Holy Land, which is located in Palestine. Jerusalem is in Palestine. They are not going to submit to what this emperor wants them to do. The Crusaders refused to pledge an oath of loyalty to Alexis, and they seized those areas that we showed in the map in the last chapter. And there will be some Western influence for a time in the Byzantine Empire because of these Italian city-states that traded in those different parts of the Mediterranean, on the coast of the Mediterranean in these areas. Tripoli is in Libya, Jerusalem was in Palestine, Antioch is in Syria. But there's eventual hostility against this, and it's eliminated. After the Fourth Crusade, the Venetians used Crusaders to capture Zara, and at this point the Byzantine throne is up for grabs at the beginning of the 1200s. And they agreed to help the son of a deposed emperor. He promised reconciliation to the churches for help, along with 200,000 in silver, and the Crusaders felt that they were acting in God's cause, and they sacked Constantinople after they weren't paid. And they were superior soldiers and had better organizational skills. And they took many relics out of Constantinople at this time. The empire revives under Pope Innocent. The Greek leader took control. He recaptured Constantinople, Palaeologus. But as time went on in the 13th century, eventually all that's left of the Byzantine Empire is the city of Constantinople, and they are surrounded by enemies. And the empire will last another 190 years. The Ottomans will come in and they will take over Constantinople with a siege. And eventually they will figure out a way to get behind into the rear of the city using logs and floating booms to ferry their troops across, and they got into the rear, and eventually then they're attacking from the front, even though there's a chain here that prevented any sort of vessels floating up. They just went around over land, and then in the back they used floating booms to position troops and cannon, which were superior, and they blasted the city apart. And in 1453, the Ottomans will be successful in destroying and ending the Byzantine Empire. Mahomet will ride into the city, praise Allah, and ordered it, the Hagia Sophia, turned into a mosque. And there's an example of a Ottoman cannon. Pretty heavy-duty artillery. And I will end this here and finish up with the Black Death in part 2.